In this video, I'll be going over how to read a ruler using the Imperial Measurement System. The Imperial Measurement System uses both whole numbers and fractions, which can be a little intimidating. But I will break it down to its simplest form, helping you better understand how fractions work and how to read a ruler. By the end of this video, you should feel more confident in your ability to understand fractions and read a ruler using the Imperial Measurement System. So let's first start off by defining the words whole and fraction. The word whole means entire, complete, or full. If you have the whole thing, then you have all of it. The word fraction means part of, piece of, or a fragment. If you have a fraction of something, then you only have part of it. You do not have the whole thing. So now let's look at whole and fraction in terms of numbers. Let's start with whole numbers. Whole numbers are numbers that are the entire number, meaning they are not part of a number, or they are not a fraction of a number. For example, 1, 2, and 3 are all whole numbers. On a ruler, 1 inch would be considered a whole unit. One quick side note, the word unit is typically used when referring to a length of measurement. Now, a fraction is part of or a piece of a whole number. For example, 1/2 is part of a whole or a fraction of a unit. We need 2 halves to make 1 whole or a full unit. For example, 1/2 plus 1/2 equal 1. On a ruler, 1/2 is only half of 1 inch. We would need 2 halves to equal a full 1 inch. One more important detail about fractions is that the top number is called the numerator and the bottom number is called the denominator. The denominator, the bottom number, signifies how many parts of that fraction equal 1 whole unit. And the numerator, the top number, represents how many parts of the whole unit are taken. To further illustrate this, let's look at 1/4, which can also be referred to as 1/4. 4 is the denominator in 1/4, meaning it takes 4 parts to make a whole unit. The number 1, the numerator in 1/4, tells us that we only have 1 part of the whole unit. We would need to add another 3/4 or 3 parts to our 1/4 to equal a whole unit. So 1/4 plus 3/4 equals 1 whole unit. One other thing to note about fractions is that the smaller the fraction, the bigger its denominator becomes. This is because when you break up a unit into smaller parts, you will have more pieces to put back together to create the whole unit again. So for 16ths, which are very small, you need 16 parts to create a whole unit. Whereas with quarters, you only need 4 parts to make a whole unit. Because quarters are bigger parts than 16ths, you need less quarters to create a full unit than you would 16ths. This is why the denominator on smaller fractions is a bigger number than the denominator on larger fractions. The smaller the pieces, the more parts you need to equal a full unit. Now that we understand what whole numbers are, what fractions are, and what the numerator and denominator represent, we can now start applying this information to a ruler. The ruler I'm using is made up of 5 measurement units. Starting from the largest to smallest, we have whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, and so on. Then we have halves, then quarters, then eighths, and finally 16ths. 16ths are the smallest measurement this ruler goes down to. By looking at each of these fractions' denominators, we can know how many parts it takes for each fraction to equal 1 inch or 1 full unit. Let's break it down by each fraction. It takes 2 halves to make 1 whole unit. It takes 4 quarters to make 1 whole unit. It takes 8 eighths to make 1 whole unit. And it takes 16 16ths to make 1 whole unit. Another important thing to note is that each fraction is half of what the larger fraction before it is. Meaning, 1/2 is half of 1 inch, 1/4 is half of 1/2, an eighth is half of 1/4, and a 16th is half of an eighth. Therefore, 2 16ths equal 1/8, 2 eighths equal 1/4, 2 quarters equal a half, and 2 halves equal 1. Also, when reading measurements, we always defer to the largest fraction or whole number. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. If I were measuring a line and it was a 1/2 inch long, I wouldn't say it's 2 quarters or 4 eighths or 8 16ths. I would say it's a half of an inch. Technically, 2 quarters, 4 eighths, and 8 16ths is correct, as they all equal a half, but that is a much less accurate way to read the measurement. You always want to read measurements in their simplest form, which means reading the largest unit. In this case, a half is the largest unit. So let's go ahead and read each measurement off the ruler, starting from 1/16 all the way up to 1 inch. 1/16, 2 16ths, which is also equal to 1/8. We would read 1/8. 3 16ths, 4 16ths, which is also equal to 2 eighths, which is equal to 1/4. We would read 1/4. 5 16ths, 6 16ths, which is also equal to 3 eighths. We would read 3 eighths. 7 16ths, 8 16ths, which is also equal to 4 eighths, which is equal to 2 quarters, which is equal to 1/2. We would read 1/2. 9 16ths, 10 16ths, which is also equal to 5 eighths. We would read 5 eighths. 11 16ths, 12 16ths, which is equal to 6 eighths, which is equal to 3 quarters. We would read 3 quarters. 13 16ths, 14 16ths, which is equal to 7 eighths. We would read 7 eighths. 15 16ths and 16 16ths, which is also equal to 8 eighths, which is equal to 4 quarters, which is equal to 2 halves, which is equal to 1 inch. We would read 1 inch. Okay, so now you know how to read a ruler. If you'd like to stay a little longer, you can try some practice measurements, which I have at the end of this video. If not, thanks for watching, and consider passing this video on to someone who could use it. So now that we understand how measurements on a ruler work, let's practice reading a few measurements from the ruler. I will say a measurement. Once I say it, pause the video and find the measurement on your ruler or on the one shown on the screen. Once you have the measurement, unpause the video to see the answer. All right, here's the first one. Find on the ruler 1 inch and 1/4. 1 inch and 1/4. Pause the video. All right, here's the answer. Now let's do another one. Now find 3 and 5 eighths. 3 and 5 eighths. Pause the video. Okay, here's 3 and 5 eighths on a ruler. Here's the next one. Find 3 quarters. 3 quarters. Pause the video. Okay, here's 3 quarters. Now try finding 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches. Pause the video. Here's 2.5 inches on the ruler. All right, let's try one more. Find 11 16ths. 11 16ths. Pause the video. Here's 11 16ths. All right, that's it. Good job, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it's been helpful for you. Please feel free to pass this on to somebody who you think could use it, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.